Hey there, this is Natalie, and welcome to a new Mushoku Tensei side story reading series. This will be part 1 of a story called Tale of the Heirloom Sword, which was originally included with a drama CD that accompanied volume 12 of the Mushoku Tensei light novel. This drama CD was originally the only way to hear Roxy's rescue and the battle with the Hydra acted out, until that part of the story was covered in the anime in Season 2 Part 2. Fittingly then, this story is about Paul, and includes, among other things, his first meetings with Ghislaine, Talhand and Elinalise. Because this story takes place long before Rudius is born, there aren't any spoilers. However, it does have a certain framing device that means it does have spoilers if you're not yet up to date on the anime. If you've seen all of Season 2 though, you can listen to this one with no worries. This story was translated by the amazing Lucius Seneca, who has not only given me permission to read this, but has also sent me a lot of other translations of Mushoku Tensei side content, which I hope to bring you in time. Definitely give him a follow on X, and I'll link to him in the description. He also does Spanish language translations, so if you prefer to read your Mushoku Tensei content in Spanish, he's your man for that too. Before we get into the story, I'd just like to let you know that anybody who supports me on Ko-fi or Patreon now gets access to full audiobook style versions of my side story readings, so MP3 files without the music, intros and outros that are on the videos. Currently there is one for Old Dragon's Tale, which is over 7 hours long, and one for the ReZero Pridif. This story, Tale of the Heirloom Sword, will be added as soon as I've finished recording the whole thing. These are really a thank you to the people who help me out with donations. It's been a very tough time for me financially, and your support means everything. There's a link in the description if you want to help out your local impoverished cat girl and also get access to those audiobooks. Speaking of which, if you like listening to my readings, please check out my new alternate channel, Natalie Narrates, where I read and react to true life, well, allegedly, stories from Reddit. I'm posting new content on there every day, and I'm hoping to get it monetized soon, so your views really help a lot. I'll link to that in the description too. And now, without further ado, relax and enjoy part 1 of Tale of the Heirloom Sword. Part 2 will be coming very soon, so make sure you're subscribed if you don't want to miss it. The Tale of the Heirloom Sword. In the kingdom of Ranua, within the magical city of Shiraya, lives a graveyard on the outskirts. It's a place seldom visited by people, but today, a group of more than a dozen individuals have gathered there. They stand before a freshly made grave, their hands clasped in unison. Let us pray that he may rest in peace. Let us pray that he does not stray from the path of the dead. Let us pray. May the divine protection of St. Millis be upon him, he intoned. Standing beside the grave, it was a priest who chanted the blessings. After completing the prayer, he made the sign of the cross, clasped his hands and bowed his head. Those around followed suit, bowing their heads in reverence. After a moment, the priest raised his head and smoothly stepped away from the grave. There he approached a young man waiting nearby. His name was Rudius Greyrat. That concludes the ceremony. With this, the departed shall wander no more, and shall be called to heaven. Thank you very much, Father. If you ever need prayers again, please do not hesitate to call upon me. Everything is according to the will of Lord Millis, the priest replied. He bowed once more and made his way through the gathered crowd, walking away from the grave. The group that had assembled at the grave was deeply connected to the events that transpired in the teleportation labyrinth. This included Rudius, Elinalise, Talhand, Gisu, Roxy, Viera and Chiera, members who had formed a party in the labyrinth, alongside Rudius's family members like Zenith, Lilia, Norn, Aisha and Sylphiette. Yes, today was the funeral of Paul. A grave had been made in the cemetery at the edge of town, and those deeply connected to Paul had gathered for their final farewells. Thank you all for gathering here today. This would surely have pleased my father. No, our father, Paul. May finally rest in peace, Rudius solemnly stated. Upon hearing this, Talhand, Gisu and Elinalise exchanged glances. They elbowed each other in the sides and shoulders as if they all had something they wanted to say, but were hesitant. Eventually, Gisu was nudged forward to speak up. "Hey, boss, this is really hard for me to say, but listen, okay?" "Eh? Was there some kind of mistake? I mean, Dad wasn't a follower of the Millis religion, so maybe having a Millis-style prayer was a bad idea? Or maybe we should have made the grave closer to Buena Village?" As Rudius nervously asked these questions, Gisu scratched the top of his head, cleared his throat with a cough, and while glancing back at Talhand and Elinalise, he said, "You know, I'm sure you're aware, but Paul was someone who hated stiff atmospheres more than anyone. Gathering at a grave, having a priest chant prayers, and then just dispersing, I can't really think that it does him any justice. You all think the same, don't you?" Looking back for support, Gisu saw that Elinalise and Talhand were nodding in agreement. Lilia, Viera and Shiera also had a kind of wry smile that said, "Indeed." Only one person seemed to insist. "That's not true. We should solemnly proceed with a Millis-style funeral," which appeared to be Norn's stance, but nearly everyone else seemed to share the opinion that Paul would not be satisfied with this. Rudius himself was among this majority. "I thought you might say that," he admitted. Thus he pulled a bottle of liquor from within his robe. "That's why I asked everyone to bring something that my father would have liked, in advance." With a pose that might be accompanied by a sound effect like BAM, Rudius raises the bottle and declares, "So today, everyone, let's have what father would have liked." Seeing this, those around exchanged glances and looked at the items they had brought. Everyone had brought various items, bottles of liquor, swords, dishes of food, fruits, and books written about adventurers' daring exploits. "Now that the stiff priest has left, let's have a fun party in the style my dad would have liked, and send him off with a bang," suggested Rudius. "That's my boss for you? You really get it." Well, I am his son after all," Rudius said with a chuckle. From this understanding, people called him this, the perceptive Rudius. No, they don't call him that. He just self-proclaimed it in his heart. "So, let's make some noise and have fun." Thus, a banquet began right there at the gravesite. The banquet was indeed lively. The adults freely opened bottles of alcohol, while the children drank juice squeezed from fruits. There were enough snacks bought by those who had brought food, but as the party went on, they ran out and had to make a run to buy more. At the height of the celebration, someone started sharing memories associated with the items they'd brought, all related to Paul. "I didn't know Dad very well, but when we were in Millis, I made this dish for him once, and he was so happy. He said, Aisha can cook like this at her age. She'll have no trouble finding a partner in the future." These fruits were the first thing we ate after being saved from a band of bandits. At that time, food was scarce among the refugees. Everyone was hungry. And then the leader said, "I managed to get this from a nearby farm. Some of it might be a bit spoiled, but please bear with it. This is all we have right now." This book was circulating back when Paul was an adventurer. You know, Paul was quite the reader. After reading it, he said, "The protagonist of this book is really dumb. If it were me, I'd do it better." Sharing memories, drinking and filling their bellies while reminiscing about the deceased made for an enjoyable time. However, there was someone who seemed uncomfortable. It was Norn. She had heard that she should bring something Paul would like, but since it was a funeral, she thought it inappropriate to bring anything strange. After much deliberation, she decided to bring Paul's beloved sword. Of course, the sword was undoubtedly one of Paul's favourite things. To Norn's knowledge, Paul had always cherished that particular sword from the time she could remember until his death. She thought there was no way he wouldn't like it. Nevertheless, Norn didn't know any specific stories associated with the sword. She had no memories to share about it. She wished she'd brought something else, knowing it would come to this. As Norn was lost in these thoughts, a man approached her. It was Gisu. He glanced at the uncomfortable Norn and the sword she was holding, then chuckled and sat down heavily next to her. "Hey, isn't that Paul's sword?" "Huh? Oh, yes. Paul used that sword for a long time, you know." "I know that too, but unlike everyone else, I don't really have any memories of Dad and his sword." Norn's voice trailed off disappointingly. Gisu quickly overlaid his voice as if to say, "Don't worry about it." "Well, Norn, you might not know this, but there's a reason Paul cherished that sword." "Really? Is that so?" "Absolutely. Think about it. The sword isn't bad, but it's not considered a famous sword either. There were plenty of opportunities to replace it with something else, yet Paul continued to use that sword. Why do you think that is?" I don't know. The reason is," Geese lowered his voice, whispering into Norn's ear, "because that sword is a lost holy sword." "A lost holy sword?" Norn exclaimed, shocked. She'd never thought that what she held could be something of such significance. Hearing her shout, those around them turned to look in their direction. Seeing this, Gisu grinned again and called over to Elinalise and Talhand nearby. "Hey, Elinalise, Talhand, you remember the lost holy sword, don't you?" "Yes." Those were the days. Brings back memories." Their responses seemed to validate Gisu's claim, making Norn's eyes sparkle with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "Want to hear about it?" "Yes, please." At Norn's words, others also showed interest, looking eager to listen. Some, like Rudius, even blatantly moved closer to listen in. "All right then, let me tell you. This was before Zenith was even in the picture, let alone before the party known as Fangs of the Black Wolf had even formed." And so Gisu's story began, the story of Paul and the lost holy sword. In the southern part of the central continent, there's a town at the northern edge of the Dragon King realms called Pampua. This town, located near the northern border of the country, is quite large for a town, and being on the outskirts of the country, is home to many mid-level adventurers. In one corner of this town, there was a tavern where adventurers gathered. Its name was Great Bird Inn. It was actually supposed to be called Great Dragon Inn, but the signboard, which depicted a large dragon, somehow looked more like an awkward bird to everyone, and the name stuck. The owner still hasn't gotten over this fact, and whenever he gets drunk, he almost always starts grumbling about the sign painter's incompetence. In this tavern, a young man was causing a ruckus. "Hey you!" This man, appearing to be in his early to mid-teens, possibly just on the cusp of adulthood, had distinctive brown hair, tied at the nape of his neck, and looked around with slightly droopy eyes. He smirked while glaring around and sneering at the corners of his mouth. Lying in front of him was a man who had just been knocked down. With blood streaming from his nose, the fallen man looked up at him with trembling eyes. Hey, are you going to sleep already? Don't you think you're a bit too weak-willed?" "Paul, I'll remember this." The man jumped to his feet and dashed out of the tavern through the door. "You'll forget about this by tomorrow, you idiot." The man causing the commotion, Paul, shouted this and then returned to his original seat. Along the way, there was a girl frozen in astonishment. She was a waitress, and as Paul passed by, she seemed to muster the courage to speak up. Thank you for your help." That man, he's been pestering me every day." The cause of the fight was that the man who had just fled the tavern had been forcefully hitting on the waitress. She'd clearly refused the man's advances. However, the man persisted and grabbed her hand. Paul, witnessing this, commented, "Ha! He can't even charm a single woman. What a loser," which infuriated the man and escalated into a fight. As a result, Paul ended up helping the girl. "It's nothing. As a man, it's natural to protect a pretty lady." Paul said this and, with a smooth gesture, took the waitress's hand and kissed it. The waitress's face turned bright red in an instant. when do you finish work today? Huh? What do you mean by that? Don't get me wrong, I don't seriously think you're cute or anything. I'll go with any girl who seems easy. Of course, those last words were not spoken by Paul. The mood was ruined by a man sitting at a nearby table. He was a handsome man with a slightly monkey-like face, and from his attire, one could tell he was a thief. Geez, geese, don't say unnecessary stuff. Paul lightly glared at the man, Gisu, but by then, the girl had already distanced herself from Paul. She was reminded of the rumours about the adventurer named Paul and his reckless behaviour. So, when do you finish work? Oh, this month has been tough, and today of all days, I have to make ropes at night. Yes, I'm quite busy. Thank you for earlier. The girl left. Her departure was quite brusque. Paul let his outstretched hand fall and sullenly made his way back to the table where Gisu was sitting. Geese, idiot! Why the heck did you have to interfere, huh? I was so close. Remember the time you nearly got stabbed in the back doing something like this? Maybe learn a bit from that. Paul, looking dejected, downed his half-finished ale as if to replenish the sweat he'd shed during the fight. Money over women. It's all about money. Let's hurry up and split this reward. The reason Paul and Gisu were at this tavern wasn't just to celebrate the completion of their mission, but also to discuss the division of their reward. Though it was an important matter for adventurers, Paul said with a bothersome expression, "Just split it evenly, that should be fine." I appreciate your generosity, but I'm just a pack mule, you know? I don't deserve half. You handled everything except the fighting. You deserve half. You're the only one who'd say something like that, Paul. It's the others who are messed up. Paul Greyrat is a C-rank adventurer. C and B ranks would typically be considered mid-tier adventurers who fully understand the ins and outs of their profession. Still, it's just a D-ranked collection request, so don't expect much. I want to make a big haul. For that, we need to rank up. To rank up, I guess we need to join a party. Paul sighed. He was a solo adventurer, not part of any specific party. However, it wasn't out of some principle that he worked solo. It wasn't due to a lack of ability either. With Paul's swordsmanship, it wouldn't be strange if he'd already advanced to B rank. In fact, he might have the skill to be A rank or even S rank. In this area, there's not a single person who wants you in their party though. It's his personality. To put it bluntly, Paul's personality is selfish and reckless. On top of that, he's a womanizer. He ignores orders, acts on his own, he doesn't mind putting his comrades in danger, and flirts with women in the party. Needless to say, it causes a lot of problems. Once, everyone saw Paul as a promising young talent and wanted to recruit him into their parties, but now no one wants to include him. Paul is recognised as a visible troublemaker, and nobody wants to add him to their team. Still, that didn't mean Paul was down and out. With his exceptional sword skills, he completed quests by force if necessary, and climbed his way up to C rank. But no matter how skilled one is with the sword, progressing beyond a certain point becomes challenging. This is because requests above C rank are often designed with parties in mind. While C rank quests can still often be resolved with 2 to 3 people, B rank and above typically require parties of 5 to 7 members. No matter how skilled, taking on such tasks alone becomes increasingly difficult. Gisu was exceptionally talented, to the point that you wouldn't think he was just a C rank adventurer, but his combat abilities were nearly non-existent. Forming a party with him meant essentially fighting alone. Under such conditions, even handling C rank requests was challenging, let alone anything of B rank or higher. Why not gather some misfits like yourself and form a party? Misfits? Are there even any? Plenty. Look, for example, over there. Gisu pointed towards a table at the edge of the tavern. There sat a woman. Not just any woman. Her body was solidly built, and she was clad in revealing clothing that accentuated her physique. She had grey hair, upright ears like those of a beast, and a tail that swayed gently from her waist. Additionally, she had a curved sword at her hip. A swordsman. The Black Wolf Ghislaine, also known as the Mad Dog. Her name was famous around here. Her swordsmanship was reputed to be far superior to Paul's, beyond the mere confines of being an adventurer, and said to be worthy of serving as a swordsmanship instructor in some country. However, one adventurer had this to say about Ghislaine. She doesn't understand language. She was violent, quick to anger, and would slash her allies as readily as enemies. Logic and jokes were lost on her, explanations and instructions beyond her comprehension. She could barely follow orders and couldn't remember complex instructions for long. If she sees an enemy, she'll attack immediately, regardless of how powerful they might be. She might even attack just because you made eye contact. A complete idiot who can't communicate. That's the impression local adventurers had of her. As Paul watched her, Ghislaine noticed his gaze and glared back at him, her hand moving towards the sword at her waist. Paul quickly looked away before she could draw her weapon. Hey, even the great Paul is scared of the Mad Dog? Of course, who wouldn't be scared of a fool who can't understand reason? Well, that's what the other adventurers think of you too, you know. As a woman, she doesn't look too bad though. Ghislaine's bust was incomparably more ample than that of the waitress from before. Of course, she was larger in every aspect, from height to shoulder width. That's why you're not in a party. You're always looking at other party members as women to take to bed. Gisu sighed and rested his cheek on his hand. Gisu, being somewhat of an outlier himself, knew that there were many other solo adventurers out there. However, those who remained solo at C rank were either lacking in ability or had personality defects. For the record, Gisu considered himself the former. Well, it's not like you absolutely have to be in a party to rank up. Huh? Do you have a plan or something? Yeah, I do. Look at this sword. Saying so, Paul drew his sword from its sheath and placed it on the table. That's a fine sword. What about it? Gisu immediately recognised it as a quality piece. The overall craftsmanship was solid, especially the blade, which was meticulously made and robust. With proper care, it could last another 100 years. It's a good sword, but that's it. Since ancient times, heroes wielded holy or magic swords, slaying vicious demons and giant monsters left and right, all by themselves. So what are you trying to say? If I had an awesome sword that matched my awesome self, I could aim higher, even solo. Well, there's some logic to that. It might sound laughable to an outsider, but Gisu said it with a serious face. Indeed, there have been cases where adventurers rose through the ranks by acquiring magical swords by chance. Of course, the requisite skill is necessary, but Paul was more than qualified. Having seen various adventurers, Gisu knew Paul's swordsmanship was a cut above. If he could really find such a sword, it might indeed take his adventuring career to the next level. It wasn't a bad idea in principle. Getting the right gear was the idea. So how do you plan to find one? Well, that's if there's an easy way to obtain it. Nah, haven't thought that far. Great help that is. See? It's impossible then. I don't even have such information to begin with. However, Paul was a man often touched by fortune. Opportunity knocked soon enough. As they were idly chatting and eating, the tavern's door suddenly swung open with a bang. Everyone turned to look. Standing at the entrance was a man dressed like an adventurer. His name was Gasket. He was a B-rank adventurer, competent enough but known for his loose tongue, easily spilling important information. Well, he wasn't famous yet. That would come a bit later. The ancient ruins. Turns out they were indeed the old temple of the Millis religion. At those words, the tavern buzzed with excitement. The Millis Church was a religious organisation that emerged during the era of the First Human-Demon Great War. It spread widely during the war, as it worshipped St. Millis, who contributed greatly to the human victory, and it aimed for order, peace and tranquility. It became a major religion, establishing temples worldwide. However, many of those temples disappeared along with the disappearance of the continent at the end of the Second Human-Demon Great War. Among those lost temples were those that contained the original scriptures of St. Millis, his clothing, symbols, or what are now known as holy relics. The loss greatly saddened those associated with the Millis religion, but perhaps their lamentations reached the heavens, as an adventurer delivered something that was supposed to be lost. It was one of the lost holy relics. When the Millis Church's representatives contacted the adventurer for more details, he responded, "I found it while exploring a cave. There was a ruin there." A ruin. Sensing something extraordinary in that word, the church dispatched a Millis priest. When the priest visited the site with the adventurer, deep underground, they indeed found a Millis temple. Yes, many Millis temples have been buried deep underground due to the land collapses that occurred simultaneously with the disappearance of the continent. The Millis Church announced a bounty for the lost holy relics, promising vast treasures to those who could find them. The prospect of such treasures lying dormant in an ancient temple naturally excited adventurers. Moreover, Gasket, with an enthusiasm that hadn't cooled, continued, "That's not all. There's a guardian in the depths of the ruins, and guess what? Beyond that guardian, there was said to be a holy sword. The lost holy sword of St. Millis." The tavern fell silent at those words. The armaments of St. Millis, they were considered the strongest in the world, said to be bestowed upon him by the gods. Some of these items are currently enshrined in the basement of the Millis Church's headquarters, but the main items, like swords, shields and armour, had yet to be found. The reward for these relics was the highest, and Gasket claimed that such a relic had been found. "Whoa!" The adventurers erupted in excitement. The sword of St. Millis, an undeniable holy sword. Its slash was said to have cleaved a demon king across the sea, cutting through the great forest from the holy city of Milishon. Possessing it would not just elevate an adventurer's status, it would make them an unrivaled existence. Whether to use it oneself or sell it to the Millis Church, either option would secure wealth enough for a lifetime, if not for generations. Of course, merely obtaining it would expose one to dangers like robbery and assassination, but those who can think that far ahead typically don't dive into the perilous, rough and mafia-like profession of adventuring in the first place. "Hey, Gisu, did you hear that?" Heard it. It's like a gift from heaven. I feel like the holy sword has come out just for me," Paul said, rising to his feet with enthusiasm, as if ready to dive into the ruins right then, despite not knowing the location. "Hey, quiet down you lot." However, the excitement of the adventurers was quelled by the shout of a man. He was a man who had been comfortably drinking in the best seat of the tavern. With flowing golden hair and a sweet face, his body was muscular, yet slender and well proportioned. Frankly, a more handsome man than Paul. Moreover, a beautiful long-eared woman was entwined around his arm, and not just a beautiful woman. Surrounding him were veterans who had weathered many battles. Thors Man, the Lord of Judgment. His name was Thors Man, the leader of the S-rank adventurer party, Lord of Judgment. He strode confidently into the tavern's entrance and stood before the man who had shouted about the ruins. "Hey, Gasket, what the hell? Why are you blabbering out important information like that?" The man who had shouted at the entrance of the tavern was, indeed, a member of that S-rank adventurer party. Likely, he had been ordered by Thors Man to gather information about the ruins. "Ah, my bad, big bro Thors Man. Just a habit, you know? Ah!" The moment Gasket spoke, he was punched in the jaw and sent crashing into the tavern's wall. "Just a habit, my arse. How many times do I have to tell you not to casually blab about information, you trash?" Thors Man kicked Gasket around fiercely and spat on the ground. Thus, Gasket became known as a man of decent skill but loose tongue, famous for easily spilling important information. But let's leave that aside. Listen up, all of you. Forget everything you heard just now. Thors Man demanded that after kicking Gasket to his satisfaction, glaring around with a chilling voice. But the ruins aren't yours to... Do you think I can tolerate people who eavesdropped on information gathered by my group just showing up at the ruins? Huh? No. I've memorised the faces of everyone here. Remember this, if I see any of you at the ruins, it won't be pretty. Intimidated by Thors Man, the adventurers looked down. Thors Man of the Lord of Judgment was a man of ill repute. His words, "it won't be pretty," were understood by everyone as a threat to their lives. Well, spreading such crucial information due to a careless mistake was beyond a level of just a slip-up. It could be considered a natural action to apply pressure within visible range. However, among those adventurers, there was one who wasn't bowing his head. Sorry, but I'll be going after it. Yes, that was Paul. Incidentally, Gisu was hiding under the table. Huh? Thors Man turned towards the voice, frowning. You, I know you. You're that C-rank brat. Paul, right? What did you just say? I said I'm going after the Holy Sword. What the... Thors Man glared at Paul, his expression suggesting he was thinking of how to intimidate or possibly harm him. But when the beautiful woman at his side whispered something to him, Thors Man burst out laughing loudly. Ha ha! Paul, I've heard a lot about you. You've got skill with a sword but can't make a single friend. A total loner. How's a guy like that supposed to get through a dungeon full of monsters, defeat the Guardian, and grab the Holy Sword? Can't know without trying. Ha! This guy's a joke. You should quit being an adventurer and become a clown instead. You all agree, right? At Thors Man's words, the rest of the Lord of Judgment party also started laughing. Paul, though his face turned red, stood his ground without turning away. Eventually, Thors Man finished laughing and sighed. I don't have the time to deal with such a foolish kid. Hey you lot, let's go. We have a strategy meeting tonight. He called out and quickly left the tavern. Perhaps not taking action against Paul was a matter of pride for him. Finally, the long-eared woman entwined around Thors Man approached Paul, who stood frustrated, and whispered in his ear, I don't dislike brave men like you. Then she blew a kiss and disappeared as well. Paul watched them leave and then slumped back into his seat with a heavy sigh. The tavern began to regain its lively atmosphere, though the topic of the Holy Sword still dominated the conversation. Gisu crawled out from under the table after the storm had passed. What are you going to do now? You're completely on their radar, right? Thors Man might have been laughing, but his eyes weren't. To an S-rank adventurer party leader like Thors Man, getting worked up over a mediocre C-rank adventurer could undermine his members' trust, so he chose only to mock in front of everyone. But that was just for now. If they encountered each other in a secluded place, it wouldn't be strange for Paul to end up dead. There's nothing to be done. I've been serious from the start. Being serious is fine, but do you have a plan? Paul frowned for a moment, then stood up and shouted to the crowd. Hey, you guys, are you okay with this? Just letting him say that? But, you know, it is true we eavesdropped on the information they gathered, isn't it? What's true? That idiot shouted it out loud in the middle of the tavern. It's their mistake. And we're supposed to just stay silent about being accused of eavesdropping? A few adventurers raised their heads at Paul's shout, their faces indicating agreement. Confirming this, Paul continued. I'm going. The Holy Sword of St. Millis. The real deal. If I get my hands on it, I'll be a hero and filthy rich. I won't let them monopolise it. Anyone willing to go to the ruins with me? The expressions of the adventurers changed slightly upon hearing this. With you? It was a natural reaction, as most of them had their own parties. If they were to go, they'd prefer to go with their own groups. Ignoring Paul's shout, adventurers began to leave the tavern one by one. Whether they intended to go to the ruins or not, they wanted to bring back the information and discuss it with their parties. Thus the tavern was left with parties not intending to go to the ruins and solo adventurers. The parties not planning to go seemed uncomfortable and began to prepare to leave hastily. Only the solo adventurers continued their meals unfazed. "Hey, are you guys okay with this?" But Paul didn't give up. He started approaching the remaining solo adventurers one by one, trying again. "Don't you want to climb higher as adventurers? Don't you want to walk around with your shoulders high like those guys from earlier? You're just spouting noble intentions to appease us, but you want the Holy Sword for yourself, don't you?" "Yeah, that's right. But once I get the Holy Sword, I'll be able to improve your equipment too. If you help me now, I'll help you in return." Paul was desperately trying to persuade them, but no one seemed willing to listen. Forming a temporary party would likely lead to a quick dissolution after obtaining the Holy Sword, as it was clear that they would just say goodbye. They knew there were others more capable than themselves. However, not everyone felt that way. One person was willing to listen to Paul's words. "I'm also pissed off by their arrogance." This person was a middle-aged man with orange hair and a muscular build, though he was short. He was from the mining tribe, known for their expertise with metals, stones and jewels, and particularly for being excellent warriors. But this man was holding a staff. Unusually for someone from the mining tribe, he was a magician. "I'm not interested in the Holy Sword itself, but if it means getting one over on them, I'm in." "That helps. I'm Paul. I'm the stern Talhand from the Great Peaks. Just call me Talhand." Talhand was known to be a stubborn man, famous for not listening to others and struggling without a fixed party. However, he was relatively sane among solo adventurers. That made 3 of them: a swordsman, a magician, and a thief. They wanted one more person. With just one frontliner, they couldn't handle attacks from behind. Paul was anxious. Should he go to another tavern to recruit more members? No, there wasn't enough time for that. Soon the taverns would close for the night, and the Lord of Judgment was likely to set out for the ruins by dawn. He needed to find 1 or 2 people right now. Paul's gaze then landed on someone. This person had remained seated at the edge of the tavern, unaffected by the commotion, not drinking or talking to anyone, just sitting as if waiting for something. Paul approached this person. "Ghislaine?" Mad Dog Ghislaine turned her sharp gaze on Paul as he spoke. "I need your help. Help me get the Holy Sword." "Are you talking to me?" "Who else?" Ghislaine appeared to ponder. Known for not thinking much, this time she seemed to be using all her wit and knowledge. "There's a condition." "What is it?" "Payment up front." Paul was taken aback. They hadn't discussed payment at all yet. However, it was natural for an adventurer to mention payment first. "Understood, but if we don't get the Holy Sword, there's no payment to speak of. For now, I'll pay whatever I can. How much do you want?" Sweat poured down Ghislaine's forehead. It was the sweat of someone straining their brain. Okay, 1 large copper coin." The words squeezed out were a considerable amount, barely within what C-rank adventurer Paul could afford. Fortunately, Paul had just completed a quest. His wallet was well supplied, including a large copper coin. It was a small price to pay for a formidable bodyguard's down payment. "Understood. Here you go." Though it was a modest request, Paul considered it a bargain and tossed the large copper coin. Ghislaine caught the coin mid-air and, visibly relieved, carefully stored it in her empty coin purse hanging from her waist. "Then it's time for a strategy meeting." Thus, Paul, Talhand, Ghislaine and Gisu formed a temporary party.